Okay, thanks a lot, Ron. It was very good. Interesting to hear about you guys. Okay, next is Myron's branch. You were still, okay. So Myron is deferring to his illustrious sons, Howie and Keith, who are going to give us a little rundown of, I still remember very well Willie, their father, but also another couple of brothers from the 11 children of Sara Lubovner. We're going to hear about them, I think, also. So right there.
Thanks, Jody. I don't think anybody has taken the time to acknowledge all the work that Jody's done to put this together, so I'd like to be the first to do so. Tonight, I have the pleasure of telling you about my grandfather, Willie. Willie Harband wasn't actually born Willie Harband. He was born Wolfgang Lubovner in Tarnapol in 1894. Although he changed his name to Willie when he arrived in America, his 13 brothers and sisters, although now I'm gathering that it was more than 13 by the chart up there, called him Velvel, his nickname, which actually Jody corrected me, his Hebrew name for most of the rest of his life. As Ron has said, my grandfather came to the U.S. in 1907 with his older sisters, Becky and Brownie. Like their older siblings who had come to America before them, Willie, Becky, and Brownie traveled in high style on a cattle boat which took them from Bremen, Germany to Galveston, Texas. It must have been quite a journey for a 12-year-old, since I'm guessing that this particular cattle boat didn't come equipped with a swimming pool, rock climbing walls, a movie theater, or round-the-clock buffet tables. My dad has said many times that although my grandfather had little formal education, he was still an educated man, well informed about politics, business, and the stock market. That's a great compliment, especially to an immigrant who came to a new country not speaking the language, especially someone who got off the boat in Texas, took the train to San Francisco, and went right to work in one of his brother's trunk factories. Eventually, my grandfather bought one of those factories, Continental Trunk, from his brother Julius. He also married Babette Mayer in 1920, and on the 29th of October 1921, my dad Myron and my uncle Monroe were born on Hollis Street in the Western Addition section of San Francisco. They were identical twins and the apple of their parents' eye every day thereafter. By the way, my grandmother Babette's grandniece and grandnephew, Judy Warburg and Scott Mayer, are here tonight, having driven down from Sacramento. They also happen to be direct relatives of Jake Harband's first wife, Sara. It's also nice to welcome Judy's husband, Andy, and their son, Sam, and Scott's wife, Miriam, along with their kids, Aliana and Alex. Tonight, you're all honorary Harbands. My grandfather eventually sold Continental Trunk to his brother-in-law, Jake, and opened his first retail store on Powell Street. This was followed by a second store a few years later on Fillmore Street, near the corner of Post. Back in the 1930s and early 40s, Fillmore Street really was the center of Jewish life in San Francisco, and Fillmore Luggage, my grandfather's store, was the de facto clubhouse for a group of friends and local merchants who always seemed to find time to stop by and talk politics, the stock market, or any other news of the day. This cast of neighborhood characters included Saul the Hat Man, Kaufman the Shoe Man, Plunka the Matchmaker, a bookie or two, and Max Wyman, whose son Bill was serving in the same company as my father in the Pacific Theater of War. These men who stopped by Fillmore Luggage to kibitz and pass the time of day would remain my grandfather's friends the rest of his life. After the war, Grandpa started Harband's Luggage with my Uncle Monroe. It was a retail luggage business at 517 Mission Street near the corner of First Street. And eventually they would expand the business to Sacramento. On weekends, my grandfather would close the Sacramento store and drive up to Stockton, where he stayed with his older sister Elkie, whose granddaughter Halcyon Daniels and her husband Larry are here tonight, having traveled up from Los Angeles to be with us. That store in Sacramento was eventually replaced by a store in San Rafael, and my grandfather would work there until he began showing the initial signs of Alzheimer's in the early 1960s. After that, he helped my uncle at the Mission Street store until he was no longer able to work. I think we all know that to get the true measure of a man, it's often necessary to view him through several sets of eyes. Like any son, my father has shared many heartfelt memories of his father with us over the years. Tonight, though, Dad wanted me to stress that his father, Willie, was a self-taught and self-educated businessman who at his core was a wonderful family man, who was a loyal brother, friend, and husband, aside from being a doting father who nurtured and protected his twin boys in every way possible. One particular story my father wanted me to share this evening took place on November 9th, 1942, as my grandfather dropped Dad off at the Southern Pacific train station on 3rd and Townsend, where he was scheduled to catch a train heading to Monterey and basic training. At that moment, Grandpa gave my dad a hug and told him simply, "I wish it were me going instead of you." For the next 3 years, my grandfather painstakingly followed the progress of the 34th Infantry as it made its way across the Pacific until my father returned home in November of 1945. In the eyes of his grandkids, my brother Keith, my sister Babs, my late cousin Laura, and myself, Poppy as we called him, will always be the tall man with a square jaw and a bright smile, whose favorite song was "Till There Was You" from the Music Man. He was also the guy who ate cream of wheat, burnt toast, and stewed prunes for breakfast every morning, and bought us vanilla ice cream after family trips to San Mateo, where we went to escape the Daly City fog. Poppy let us stand on his feet while he danced around the room as Lawrence Welk played in the background, and we'd laugh with him when Crazy Guggenheim came on during the Jackie Gleason show, or Topo Gigio appeared with Ed Sullivan. For anyone here under the age of 30, Ed Sullivan and Jackie Gleason had variety shows. It's the kind of TV program we watch just after the dinosaurs became extinct. Believe it or not, my grandfather also took us to Winterland. Yep, that Winterland. But Jeremy, before you start getting too jealous that your Beaupas didn't take you to Winterland, I just want to tell you that we didn't get to see the Allman Brothers or the Grateful Dead. We only went to the Ice Follies. I don't think I ever saw my grandfather dress in casual clothes. In pictures and in my mind's eye, Willie Harband is always dressed in a suit and tie, with a white shirt, polished leather shoes, perhaps topped off with a felt fedora hat. He may have enjoyed dancing or playing cards with his brothers, but like so many immigrants of his generation, my grandfather's world was defined by family and work, with little room for anything else. Even when Alzheimer's was robbing him of his memory and his dignity, he instinctively knew that morning meant it was time for work and time to put on his suit, because in his mind, there would always be customers to greet and suitcases to sell. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Norman, who was the youngest of the, depending on how you count them, 16, 17, or 18. Norman was the youngest. He was born in Tarnapol, I believe in 1898, and was born with a bad hip, which unfortunately was operated on by a doctor who apparently botched the operation, and Norman always walked with a limp. He was a small man and quiet. When he came to San Francisco, he opened a tailor shop, which doubled as a bookie operation. He also ran a restaurant and helped manage Uncle Julius's parking lots. He would often come to our house for dinner. He loved my mom's pot roast and potato kugel, but most of all, he loved my grandfather. And he was very loyal to him, especially when my grandfather became sick. And I know my parents really appreciated his loyalty and the love that he showed to my Grandpa Willie. So with that, I'll give it over to my brother Keith.
So I'm very proud and honored to have been asked to speak about our great-uncle Joe and Joe's daughter, our cousin Miriam, or Mimi, and her husband Oscar. It must be noted that Joe's wife's name was Rose, and they also had a daughter by the name of Rosalie. Unfortunately, Mimi and Oscar's own daughter Sara couldn't join us, but I'll do my best to provide you all with a snapshot of who these uncles and cousins were. Joe was one of the Harband brothers and sisters originally from Tarnapol, many of whom immigrated to the U.S. and, as you know, settled in California and San Francisco. Joe was born in 1883 between Sigmund, who was born in 1882, and Sabina, who was born in 1884. To be honest, I don't remember Joe personally since I was born after he passed away. However, from my research, he was characterized as a quiet, shy, and fairly serious guy who only tended to open up typically when he was around his brothers and sisters or his close friends. He enjoyed playing cards, especially pinochle, and professionally he was an accomplished auctioneer and antique dealer who owned Harband's auction studio in San Francisco. From all reports, he was a very respected industry professional who was often recommended for spillover assignments by the bigger auctioneering powerhouses such as Butterfield and Butterfield. He had a real passion for the business and loved the thrill of a great estate or antique find. He particularly enjoyed purchasing blind lots, often simply closed barrels filled with the great unknown, some items turning out to be of value, most of it turning out to be junk. I'm sure that if Joe were still alive today, he would be a huge fan of current television shows such as Storage Wars, American Pickers, or Pawn Stars, watching people in similar careers who shared his same passion. Mimi and Oscar. Unlike Joe and Rose, Mimi and Oscar I knew extremely well, and in fact were like a second set of parents to Babs, Howie, and I. Not a day goes by that I don't think of them in some fond, often funny way. In fact, my son Matt, who couldn't make it tonight, is named after Mimi, so that should provide you with a glimpse of in how high a regard we all have for her. Their house at 331 San Fernando Way in San Francisco, just off Ocean Avenue, wasn't far from our house growing up, and it was the site of many a cousin's party. Even as the youngest cousin, I have a very clear recollection of those parties with a lot of cooking going on in the front of the house, and Sara manning her record player with Babs, Howie, and my cousins Emily and Lisa Honig, and Laura Harband hanging out in Sarah's room in the back of the house. To this day, I can't hear certain Neil Diamond or Mamas and Papas songs and not be reminded of those times. They seem to be playing constantly. There are also the movie soundtracks that were often playing, and whenever I hear songs from My Fair Lady, it brings me back to those times as well. Mimi and Oscar, from a physical and personality standpoint, could not have been more different. Mimi was relatively small and rail thin with dark hair that was built up so she seemed a little bit taller than she actually was. Mimi was quiet and reserved, even a bit taciturn. Some might describe her as being a little standoffish or even aloof, but in my opinion it was a reflection of her shyness and probably sharing a similar personality to her dad, Uncle Joe. She had a great sense of humor and was quick to laugh, particularly to one of Oscar's off-color jokes. She was a voracious reader, especially mysteries, passionate in her quest to master Hebrew, and an excellent cook. Sadly, she was doomed with a sensitive stomach and couldn't enjoy many of the dishes she made for others. Uncle Munro, in particular, my dad's identical twin, loved Mimi's cooking and was always in attendance when Mimi was manning the stove. Mimi was also very, very family-oriented, always there to lend a hand to anyone in need. Physically, Oscar was about 6'3" and probably weighed in at about 250 pounds, with a full head of white hair and resembled a polar bear. Oscar, though related to all of us by marriage, was truly an honorary Harband, and he loved to make fun of us, all of us. He would tell us frequently that all Harbands were stubborn as mules, and he would also say that he wouldn't call Harbands cheap, but let's just say they're frugal. All of this was done with a big belly laugh and a twinkle in his eye. He enjoyed every minute of needling us, and my dad, probably his best friend in the world, probably got it the most. I remember as a really young kid riding down to LA in a caravan of station wagons full of Harband cousins for Sherman Kaplan's bar mitzvah. Sometime during the early summer, which was like June something.
It was 1969,
Well, it was hot, whenever it was. And we're driving down, and Oscar, who's behind...
it was March 15th, I can tell you.
Oh, okay. Well, it was hot anyway.
Southern California.
The Thule fog had burned off. So Oscar's behind the wheel and asks my dad to put on the air conditioning because it's so hot. My dad inadvertently put on the heater instead, a gaffe that Oscar never quite let him forget. He could tease us until the cows came home, all in good-natured fun, of course, but pity the poor fool who criticized any of us in his presence. Then the polar bear would quickly show his claws. A well-known part of family lore is when my brother Howie was born, that he had quite a formidable bruise on his head. And as you can tell, it has healed quite nicely. But Oscar, of course, is at the hospital to celebrate his birth, and as he's standing at the nursery window, some off-duty cop starts making fun of Howie's bruised head, saying that it reminds him of his sergeant's mug. Oscar immediately jumped to his defense, telling him, "Hey, that's my little cousin you're talking about, so you better pipe down." Shaken, the cop apologized and slinked away. The best way to sum up Oscar's sense of humor was his usual greeting and farewell whenever we showed up at the Kaufman's house. His usual greeting while standing on the front landing was more like a loud bellow. "Miriam, your cousins are here again," and his signature farewell as we departed. "Okay, good night, Harbands, and remember, don't call us, we'll call you." Professionally, Oscar was an auctioneer too, who worked for many years for his father-in-law Joe at Harband's auction studio, and then went into business with his partner Harry in an auction studio on Haight Street. He also was the official auctioneer for the San Francisco Police Department, whose police auctions were held monthly. The property clerk's office would set aside unclaimed goods that had been confiscated from criminals to be sold to the general public to generate revenue for the SFPD. Truth be told, it took me quite a while to finally figure out why we had so many scales to auction, only figuring out later that they were originally taken as evidence against drug dealers. Mimi was the head cashier, and I was hired by Oscar as one of the runners, someone who delivered the sold item to the purchaser, got the cash, and returned change, along with trustees who were let out of jail for good behavior that week. I did this for years and was able to gain a glimpse of Mimi and Oscar in a professional sense. Mimi, as was her personality, was quiet, efficient, and focused. Oscar was, in a word, hilarious. People would come in just to hear him and his jokes. He wasn't the kind of auctioneer who talked really fast in a staccato tempo, but was very deliberate and funny. A typical exchange. "You see this widget? It's a piece of crap, and we're selling it as is. So don't come up to me after this is over and complain about the fact that you bought a piece of crap. Capiche?" For a piece of costume jewelry, he would say, "I know you think you're going to miraculously find some valuable piece of jewelry here, and you're thinking that this ring might be real gold and diamonds, but it isn't. In fact, it's just brass and glass, my friends. And not only that, it's not even high-quality brass and glass." So in closing, Mimi and Oscar treated us all like they were her own kids. We were their own kids. Howie and I in particular were their boys, since their one child was a daughter. And they loved us unconditionally, and everyone should be so lucky to have a Mimi and Oscar in their life. Thanks.
Okay, well done. Thanks very much, Howie and Keith. It's great to see that somebody can do a great presentation without having to do PowerPoint.